Hi everybody, welcome to part 3 on the Volkswagen T4 bonnet. We're going to talk you through what I've done because I left you off in part 2 and we've got the epoxy down. Now that's what you can see here. Now I'm going to talk you through the stages that I've done to this after the epoxy, and then we can move on to the next primer that you're going to put down. So this will be sort of broke down, this video is going to be broke down into loads of parts. So if you're wondering on how to apply drying times and things, this is what I'm going to talk to you about in these videos. You're not going to see time lapses, you're just going to see info, talking info, and then shots of what I've done. I think that's the best way of doing it, instead of looking at high speed time lapse of someone spraying some paint down. We can all see that on YouTube. So talking through it, what I did. So in part 2 you've seen sort of the prep that I did on this. Now there was comments on the channel, people saying, there's one saying, why didn't you paint stripper it back to bare metal or sand it completely back to bare metal? Yeah, we could have done that, but when it's a collab and you're swapping time with another YouTuber, so the other YouTuber's got his skills and his skill set that he does for his channel, and I've got mine, what I do for my channel. So you come together and you swap your trades, sort of thing, to get a job from each of you. It works out cheap because you're just sharing your time, you know. Now adding more time onto this then sort of interferes with my day-to-day work, because you've got to fit these sort of things around when you've got free time to do them. Vice versa for both people that are doing it. So stripping it back to bare metal, it would have gone through ridiculous amounts of discs just to go and do that. So then you're looking cost. Then you're looking at paint strippers. Now I've dealt with some paint strippers in the past, and the ones of today, they're not all that. There's probably a couple of brands that I could think of that's half decent, but then you're laying out a lot of money. You're creating a lot of horrible mess to get it to bare metal before you even start looking at where the dinks, the dents are, the rust is. So a test for me, or you if you're looking at an older bonnet, is to check the paint first. Now the way I went round checking the paint on this, I knew it was an original yellow underneath, because when I flipped it you could see the original yellow is underneath. It's the original factory paint. Then whatever's on top of that is what someone's put on. Now this looked like it had been done either aerosol. When you look at the side of the van and some of the side of the van, it looked like it had been done with spray gun, and it may have well been put on with a spray gun, but badly in its time. Black, we all know that black, the sun just wallops down on black and heats it up. So if it's a bad paint job and you've got, when the sun hits it, cooking it and cooking it and cooking it, it's a bit like red. When you see red paintwork on cars, it oxidizes and just goes pink because the sun UV kills it. With black cars, it just really heats up, so it's been beaten with the elements, dulled it all off, and it looked quite matte. So I checked it by scratching it, thumbnail for starters, just over random areas, just to see if any of it was flaking. Because most of the time when people, DIYers, spray stuff, they don't key the surface up, they just itching to spray and they just spray straight over the surface underneath. So it was keyed, so the paint had adhered to it. So I checked it by scratching it, going around with a knife, just looking at it and just tickling the paint. Nothing was chipping off, flaking back, or really coming away as I was scratching it with my nail. Then I went in with some sandpaper, sanded it and feathered it back, and then looked at how it feathered back, and it was feathering back clean from original paint feathering up through. So the paint was on there, so I thought, right, best thing to do with this, and the easiest option, is to seal it off. Do the filler work and then seal it with epoxy. Good coat of epoxy over it, job done. That seals it, and it's got really good, it's good for your anti-corrosion. So if you're going down bare metal, epoxy, it's the way to go. Just seal it off, and that'll go over all your bare metal edges. Some people use etch primers. I had issues with etch primers in the past. A lot of people use aerosol etch primers Etch primer down to bare metal. I've had where etch primers like that have bit me in the arse. When you go to lay an etch primer over something and it goes over another bit of paintwork, it can fry it up. So I sort of steer clear of etches unless it's a good one. The only one that I've used that's been really good is the industrial one they use in the body shop, and it's like a brown colour. That stuff goes on things, and you have no dramas in between or overlaying it. You've got to be careful filling over etch primer as well. You're not supposed to. So epoxy, I just sort of know it's sort of my route, my go-to. If it's bare metal or I'm sealing over something, I instantly think epoxy, and just because I know it works and I know all the people who use it and watch other people that run big YouTube channels seal things off epoxy. So if it works for that guy that's been doing it 20-30 years, I'll go with that advice because that must be good and it must work. So epoxy for me went in, and then you've seen on that bit where I was marking all the stone chips, because this was absolutely peppered in stone chips, because the bonnets sit sort of like this. They've got quite a slope to them. It's not like a car bonnet where it's like that. You usually get your stone chips on the front of a car bonnet here. The rest of this, the stones are going over that, and usually your windscreen, and that's why you get all your chips on your windscreen. It's usually the front edges on bonnets, but these, because the bonnets sit sort of quite like this, it's got more of a flatter area to hit when them stone chips are coming up. So it was peppered from the bottom lip to the top. So I went round and marked it with a water-based pencil. All the areas that I could see. Now, there was a lot of black paint on this, so you cannot pick up every single stone chip. You got to remember there is hundreds of them on this bonnet on the front. You're not just looking at 5 or 6, you're looking at loads of them. But you can't see very well because it's black, so I'm looking down it, marking it. Thought I'd got them all. But then in the back of my mind I thought, well, if I've not got them all, I know I'm putting epoxy down. So the epoxy had a good coat. I'd filled all the bits that were bad, put the epoxy down, had a look when it's dry, and there was a few that I'd missed. You could just see where the epoxy just went in slightly on some of them and not dropped down. The epoxy had gone in, but it was just sort of low. And I didn't want to start blocking it down to try and lose them tiny ones. I thought I'd rather block it, tiny skim of filler, because you're putting microns thick of filler. I went back in after I guide coated it and the epoxy had gone off. Now drying the epoxy, we'll move on to that. You can, with epoxy, with this meeple on, I could have gone sort of back to back and then put a high build over the top within an hour. I could have left this at room temperature, say 20, 30 degrees, leave it for an hour in the studio after I put the epoxy down, and then I could have hit it with the high build. But then I thought, no, I'm not going to go down that route. I'm going to leave the epoxy to dry and then just key the epoxy up. It's not a problem. You just got to key it up after it's dried off, ready for your next coat of paint. So I thought, I'm going that route. I'm not rushing this, because the minute you start to rush it and try and force dry everything, rush, that's when things go wrong, and that's when you start getting fry-ups, and that's when the paint you're just going to get issues. So I left the epoxy overnight, and then the next morning when it was beating down sun, I just pulled the bonnet outside, put it in full direct sunlight, and then went off, done my shopping. We was out for about 4 hours, came back, and the bonnet was just sat in direct sunlight, and it was hot yesterday. So when you touched the bonnet, it was like it had just come out of a booth of bake. It was red hot. So I thought, yeah, that's definitely cured down. That's had like 12 hours and then 4 hours bake in the sun. So the epoxy's gone off. Then I guide coated it and flatted it, and it sanded up lovely. It was powdering up. It wasn't snagging or gripping when you sand paint that's not sort of cured, you'll know your sandpaper grabs it and it starts to get little bobbles on the sandpaper where it's dragging, it's not dry. So I knew that was dry, so I thought, right, that's cured down, we can now guide coat it. Then I went in and just mixed a tiny bit of filler up and just spotted over any bits that I could see looking down it, any little dimps, imperfections that were left. Went over, spotted all them, then flatted that out, and then went back in with epoxy and sealed any breakthroughs where I'd been up to the edges and sanded. Went round and just went over again with the epoxy and just spotted over with a bit of epoxy any bits that were breakthrough. So that's how you see it now. This has now been dried again, left overnight with them little bits of epoxy that I'd gone around the edges with. It's all dry. I've come in this morning and then just hand sanded with a foam soft pad 320 and keyed it up. So that's keyed up, and now that is good to go for the next stage. So we're going to move on to the 2K iBuild primer. Now this one's a MIPA product. It's a 4:1 mix, so 4 parts primer to 1 part hardener, and then you can thin this to a consistency what you want. Now I don't need the build on this because the good part of the build was the epoxy on this, and then I've flatted, sorted it out, and then put a bit more epoxy on and flatted and sorted it. So if I go 3 coats of a, not a very washed out primer, but a little bit thinner, so it atomises nice through a 1.4, so not really full on thick, give it 3 coats of that, we're still going to get the build, but it's going to lay down smoother on the bonnet. Now that's what I want, because all the prep work and the flattening and all the stuff is done on this. I'm not going to worry about any more filling, sorting bits out. It's sorted. So 3 coats of a nice smooth primer over this. Then when it comes to your next bit of preparation, you've got less to do. So this will go down smoother. We'll let this go off. It's going to go off overnight again. It's going to get dragged outside today. I'm going to put the primer down. I'm just going to drag it outside because it's a very hot day today. I'm just going to let the sun do its thing and cook it. Cook it for a couple of hours outside, bring it back in here, and then we can guide coat this. This will be guide coated, blocked and sanded, hand blocked and sanded in 320. Just going to go straight in with 320, and then I'll just take it up to 800. Finish it off in 800 grit, and that's good to go for your base coats. You can then put your base coats down, let the base coats, I've got to let the base coats on this cure right off. So leaving my base coats to cure right off, because I've got artwork going down. I've got Nardo grey to put on all the way across it, so cover the whole thing in the Nardo grey, and then I've got to project the artwork up, and we've got to do like a feathered out piece of artwork in the side here in white as a background, and then I've got to feather the Nardo grey into it. So I'm going to go Nardo grey, put that down, let that go off, scotch it, grey scotch it, then I'm going to drop the white down where I need it, because I've got to be able to pick the bonnet or put it on an easel, sort it all out, project up, find out where the artwork's going. So that Nardo grey's got to have gone off and be keyed back up again. Put that patch in of white that I need, then that white's got to go off, then the white's got to be flatted back and keyed up for the artwork to go on. So it's a process that if you stick to it and don't rush it and force dry, heat lamps, brush, that's when things go wrong. So if you are doing a job for somebody, just put them extra days on the job, guys, and just think to yourself, yes, you could have this job back in 2 days earlier, but it's not happening with me. This is the way I do it. This is the way I'm going to stick to doing it and not rush it, because I've rushed jobs in the past and they bite you in the arse and things go wrong. So if it takes a little bit longer, it takes a little bit longer. So that's where we are on this. So peace of mind, epoxy, really good stuff. It seals down, job done. We could go polyester on top of this. Now the polyester I build that I've got is incredible, but you've got to warrant costs again. It's not a cheap product, it's a very expensive product, the one that I've got. But the sanding capability on the polyester that I've got is incredible, and the finishes you can get with it are, it's just mind-boggling. And then the finishes of your paintwork is just incredible. But we've got to go me per eye build. It's on the right cost-effective track. It's a good product. We're going to use that. So there's loads of products that you can use. We've got a nice clear coat going down on this. On top of this one, very nice clear coat, which is a HS one. So that'll be finishing it off. So the products that have gone on it aren't your budget, low-end, cheapy off Amazon or eBay. They're good brand products that are going on it. When it comes to like the airbrush paints and the base coats, it's all quality products that have gone through onto this. Now we're getting it done. So I'll see you in the next step. I'm not going to put you through the time lapse of putting the primer down. We've got gun settings. I'm going to be using the FLG on a 1.4 for the primer. Around 1518 bar pressure, full fan, full fluid, and just put a nice coat of eye builder, just build it up, flashing off in between coats. We're going to give it about 10 minutes in between coats. Let it flash off, drop the next coat down, flash off again, next coat, job done. Don't wallop your primers down too much, especially if you're thinning them out. If you're putting quite a bit of thinner in it because you want it thin, just put it down and just build it up nice. Don't wallop it straight on because you've got a lot of solvent there, thinners in that paint to thin it down. The minute that hits the paint underneath, if you're not careful, then thinners just go and attack that keyed up surface. So you'll broke the surface of that paint underneath. So you've exposed, you've sort of ripped off the hard top of it and you've sanded into it and exposed with like loads and loads of scratches. That loads of solvent in your primer is going to go on that and go, oh hello, and it just wants to go and liven up the underneath. So if you put it down light and build it up, you get less issues. Because I've gone through all this, fry ups, having to strip primers back, put it down again. It's an absolute ball ache. So go in nice and light between your coats, you'll be good to go. So we'll move on. I'll get some primer knocked up, and the next shot you will see, this will be in primer. Right guys, there you go. We've moved on to the next stage. We've got the high build primer down. Now as you can see, slightly different colour, different tone of grey. Now I went in on this with the De Vilbiss FLG on 1.4 and just sort of gave the primer, the high build, a little bit of thinners, about 10 to 15%, and just sort of thinned it out a bit. Done one coat all round under the edges, let that flash off, 15, 20 minutes, 20C in the stirrers, with the extractor running, bringing warm air in, just over the top. You can just see it flash off, then dropped another coat, let that flash off, and then dropped a third coat. So it's had 3 coats of the MIPA high build. Now what I'm going to do is just let this cure for the day. Let this go off completely overnight. I'm going to drag it outside in the heat and in the sun. In about 20 minutes I'm going to take it out because this is not long been painted. We'll dry this down, and then the next stage on this will be to guide coat it. So guide coating your filler work or primer work, I think the best one to use is the dry guide coat. You get an applicator sponge in these and it's like a powder and you wipe it over. This stuff lasts a lot longer. You can use a black aerosol can and just sort of back off like you do a drop coat and just dust it on so you get speckles of black paint that go over the top. And what this does is, it's basically a visual aid when you block over the top. So what you basically do, where all that powder or the paint sinks in, because your primers don't go down really smooth because you're using a big spray gun. sort of a biggish needle and nozzle setup and you're sort of putting it down to get build, you'll get like a textured finish. You won't get like a real flat finish you get like when you put your clear coats down. You just get a build up, so you're going to get like a rough sort of finish. It won't be smooth. So the powder or the paint will sink into, basically the primer is going to look like that, all the little bits sticking up, and your powder is going to go into the low spots, go over the high spots and the low spots. So when you start to block it off, you'll start to see either the speckled paint or the powders will start to disappear as you block it, and then you'll come through to grey again. And so it's just giving you a visual aid as you block it back. When the black dots or the powder starts to disappear, you're getting it flatter. So you just work through your grits like that. You could put guide coat down on this, say now, and you could start it with a 320 if you wanted, or you could start it in a 240. Block that back, so you've got 240 scratches in there now. Then you could re-guide coat it and then go down your grit. Re-guide coat it, go down your grit. As long as you've got plenty on there, plenty of meat to have a play around with. If you've gone in light with your primer, you've gone like 2 coats, it was quite thin, you've gone 2 coats, but it's laid down a little bit smoother, I'd just hit it with a 320 and finish off in like an 800 or 500 and finish it in that. You're good to go. But use your guide coat, it really does help, and that's what I'll be using on this. I'll be guide coating this up, and this will be its final sort of flat, and then you know it's good for the base coat. So that's it for today's video. It's basically a talk through, so you get to see the bonnet as it was in the epoxy, and now you've got to see it in the high build. Air pressure on the gun that I was using, because it was a 1.4. 1.4 is quite a small needle and nozzle setup for primer, and that's why I just sort of thinned it down a bit to get it through the gun. So I upped the pressure a bit in the gun and just opened the gun fully up, just full trigger, and just getting a nice wet coverage on it, and then just giving it plenty of flash time in between. That's all you've got to do. But I'd recommend, if you are sticking your primers down 1.6 up to 2 mil minimum, you can go 2. I think you can get 2.2 in spray guns, but go sort of the bigger the needle and nozzle on your gun setup for your primers, because they are thicker. When you start coming down on the next coats that you're going to see, they're going to be smaller nozzle setups, different guns, and then when it comes to the clear coat it'll be a different setup again, just so we can apply the paint different ways. So hope you enjoyed it. Don't forget, drop your comments, tell me your thoughts. I will see you guys in the next one. I'm going to get this all prepped off camera, but I've just told you basically what I'm going to do. And then we're going to move straight into the base coat stages, which will be tomorrow. We're going to drop the base coat stages down, and we're going to start moving on to the artwork. So the fun stuff with the airbrush and different paints. So thanks for watching, guys. See you in the next one.